Father came back from the battlefield, but he was never the same. The train station was crowded that Tuesday morning. Families clutched handwritten signs, scanning every face that emerged from the steel carriages. When I saw him tall, withered, walking with a slight limp, my heart stopped. Dad was home. But something was wrong. The man who left 3 years ago with jokes on his lips and fire in his eyes now moved like he was carrying an invisible weight. His uniform hung loose on his frame. His smile, when it came, never quite reached his eyes. "Welcome home, soldier," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. He hugged us, Sarah, me, little Tommy, who barely remembered him, but his embrace felt distant, like he was there but not really there. At dinner, we peppered him with questions about the war, about his friends, about the places he'd seen. "I'm just glad to be back," he'd say, cutting his steak into precise squares. "That's all that matters now." The weeks turned into months. Dad found work at the factory, came home at 6 sharp, helped with homework. On the surface, everything looked normal. But at night, I'd hear him pacing in the living room. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window, his jaw clenched tight. Sarah noticed it too. "It's like he left part of himself over there," she whispered one evening as we did dishes. Tommy, now 8, would climb onto Dad's lap during TV time. "Tell me about the war, Daddy," he'd beg. Dad would ruffle his hair and change the subject. "Let's talk about school instead, buddy." The silence grew heavier each day. Mom tried to bridge the gap with his favorite meals, family game nights, Sunday drives to the lake. Nothing worked. He was physically present but emotionally unreachable. Then one Saturday morning, everything changed. Dad was fixing the back porch steps, a project he'd been promising Mom for months. Tommy was helping, or trying to, mostly just handing Dad the wrong tools. I was inside when I heard the crash. The old toolbox had tumbled down the porch steps, spilling its contents across the yard. Screwdrivers, nails, and washers scattered everywhere. But there, caught between the hammer and a box of screws, was something that didn't belong. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. Tommy picked it up, curious. "What's this, Daddy?" The color drained from Dad's face. For a moment, he just stared at the paper in Tommy's small hands. Then, moving faster than I'd seen him move since he got back, he snatched it away. "It's nothing," he said, his voice sharp. "Just old receipts." But we all saw how his hands shook as he shoved the paper deep into his pocket. That night at dinner, the tension was suffocating. Dad barely touched his food, his eyes distant again. When Mom asked if he was feeling all right, he just nodded and excused himself early. Later, after everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. Through the kitchen window, I could see Dad in the backyard, sitting on the porch steps. In the moonlight, I watched him unfold that same piece of paper. He read it for a long time. Then he pressed it against his chest and wept. I'd never seen my father cry before. The next morning, we would discover what that letter contained and why our father had carried it home from hell. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words cut deep. Dad left for work early that Tuesday, before any of us were awake. He'd been doing that lately, leaving before dawn, coming home after dark. Avoiding conversations, avoiding questions, avoiding us. Mom was worried sick. "He's slipping away from us," she told Sarah over coffee. "I don't know how to reach him anymore." That's when Sarah made the decision that changed everything. "The letter," she said quietly. "We need to find it." I knew it was wrong. Privacy, boundaries, respect, all the things our parents had taught us. But seeing Dad disappear a little more each day was worse than snooping through his things. We waited until Mom went grocery shopping. Dad's study was off limits normally, but these weren't normal times. Sarah found it almost immediately tucked inside his copy of The Art of War, the book he'd been reading obsessively since his return. The paper was thin, almost translucent. The ink was faded brown, like dried blood. At the top, in Dad's careful handwriting, November 15, 1951. "Somewhere near Chosin Reservoir." Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded it completely. We read it together, our eyes widening with each line. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I need you to know some things before you hear them from someone else. Yesterday, we lost Peterson. Good man, 3 kids back in Ohio. The day before that, Martinez. Remember him? The one who sent you that recipe for tamales last Christmas. I'm writing this in a frozen foxhole while Chinese mortars fall around us. My fingers are so cold I can barely hold the pen. But I need to get this down because I might not get another chance. Helen, I need you to forgive me for what I'm about to tell you. We were ordered to take Hill 1081. Simple enough on paper: knock out the enemy position, secure the high ground. But when we got there, we found civilians, families, old people, children, hiding in the caves we were supposed to clear. Command said they might be harboring enemy soldiers, said to neutralize all potential threats. You know what that means. I couldn't do it, Helen. I looked at this little girl, she couldn't have been more than 6, with these big dark eyes, and I couldn't pull the trigger. So I let them go. I opened a back exit and told them to run. But Henderson saw me, said I was compromising the mission. We fought about it. Really fought. And when the Chinese counterattacked an hour later, they came through that same exit I'd opened. We lost 8 men that day. 8 good men who won't be coming home to their families because of my choice. Henderson didn't make it out. Neither did Jackson or Murphy. Boys who trusted me to lead them home. So here's what I need you to know: if I die out here, it might be God's justice. Those 8 men died because I chose mercy over orders. I chose one family of strangers over 8 American soldiers. I keep seeing their faces, Helen, the little girl I saved, and Jackson's bloody helmet in the snow. I don't know which image will haunt me more. If I somehow make it home, I don't know how I'll carry this. How do I look at our children and pretend I'm the same man who left? How do I sit at our dinner table knowing I'm responsible for 8 empty chairs at other tables? Maybe it's better if I don't come back. Maybe it's better if I die here in the snow, with the rest of them. But Helen, if there's a God, and if He lets me see you again, promise me something. Promise me you'll help me remember how to be human again. Because right now, I feel like a ghost. I love you more than my own life. Tell the children their daddy tried to be good, even when being good got people killed. Forever yours, Frank. P.S. There's $847 in my footlocker, and a watch that belonged to my father. Give the money to Henderson's widow in Tulsa. Give the watch to Tommy when he's old enough to understand what it means to make impossible choices. The letter ended there, but my hands kept shaking long after I finished reading. Sarah was crying quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto her lap. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. He came home, she finally whispered. But part of him stayed in that frozen hole. I thought about all those nights Dad paced the living room. All those times he stared out windows, seeing something we couldn't see. The way he flinched when Tommy ran up behind him. The way he cut his food into perfect squares, like he was still eating military rations. 8 men, I said softly. He's been carrying 8 ghosts. We carefully refolded the letter and put it back exactly where we found it. But the words were burned into our minds forever. That night, when Dad came home from work, I watched him differently. The slight limp wasn't from the war injury, it was from the weight he carried. The distant look in his eyes wasn't emptiness, it was the faces of the men he'd lost. And suddenly, his silence made perfect sense. We thought we understood our father's pain. We had no idea we were only seeing the beginning. Reading his words broke us more than silence ever did. We kept the secret for 3 days. 3 impossible days of looking at Dad across the dinner table, knowing what he carried, unable to say anything. On Friday night, it all fell apart. Dad was helping Tommy with his math homework. Simple multiplication tables, the kind of innocent childhood task that should have been easy and pleasant. But Tommy was frustrated, erasing his answers over and over. I can't get it right, Daddy, Tommy whined. It's too hard. Dad was patient at first. Try again, buddy. Take your time. But as Tommy's frustration grew, so did Dad's tension. I could see it building the rigid set of his shoulders, the tight grip on his pencil. 8 times 7, Tommy read from his worksheet. 8 times 7 is, Dad went perfectly still. 56, he whispered, his voice hollow. Tommy brightened. 56. Right. So 8 times 8 would be 64. Dad's voice was getting quieter, more distant. And 8 times 9? 72. Something in Dad's tone made Tommy look up. Daddy? Are you okay? Dad was staring at the homework sheet, but I knew he wasn't seeing multiplication tables. He was seeing 8 faces. 8 men who would never help their own children with homework. I need some air, Dad said. Suddenly, pushing back from the table so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He walked outside, leaving Tommy confused and a little scared. What did I do wrong? Tommy asked Mom. Nothing, sweetheart, Mom said, but her eyes were worried. Daddy just needs a minute. That's when Sarah broke. He was protecting children, she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. In the war, he let a family escape and 8 soldiers died and he thinks it's his fault. Mom stared at her. What are you talking about? So we told her everything. About the letter, about the choice Dad made in Korea, about the guilt he'd been carrying for 3 years. Mom listened in silence, her face growing paler with each detail. When we finished, she was quiet for a long time. He never told me, she whispered. 3 years, and he never said a word. Tommy, who was 8 but smart enough to understand the basics, looked confused and sad. So Daddy saved some kids but other soldiers got hurt? Yes, Sarah said softly. And he blames himself. But saving kids is good, Tommy said with the simple logic of childhood. Daddy did a good thing. If only it were that simple. Mom went outside to find Dad. Through the kitchen window, we watched her approach him on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, his head in his hands. We couldn't hear what they said, but we saw him break down. All the pain he'd been holding inside for 3 years poured out. Mom held him while he sobbed deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from his soul. They talked for over an hour. Sometimes Mom was crying too. Sometimes Dad would look up at the sky like he was asking for forgiveness from the men he'd lost. When they finally came back inside, Dad's eyes were red but clearer than they'd been in months. Kids, he said, his voice rough. We need to talk. So we all sat around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless family dinners, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where Tommy had struggled with his multiplication just an hour earlier. Dad told us everything. Not just the facts from the letter, but the feelings behind them. The nightmares where Henderson called his name. The way he saw Jackson's face every time he looked at Tommy. The crushing weight of wondering if he'd made the right choice. I saved 6 people that day, he said quietly. A grandmother, 2 parents, and 3 children. But 8 American soldiers died because of my decision. You couldn't have known, Sarah said. You couldn't have predicted what would happen. Dad shook his head. A leader's job is to predict. To protect his men. I failed him. But Daddy, Tommy said, climbing onto his lap the way he used to when he was smaller, what if those kids had families too? What if they had daddies who wanted to come home? Out of the mouths of babes. Dad held Tommy close, tears running down his face again. You're right, buddy. They did have families. And maybe that little girl is grown up now. Maybe she has children of her own. Because you saved her, I said. Because you chose mercy, Mom added. Dad was quiet for a long time, processing this different way of looking at his choice. The other soldiers, he finally said. Henderson, Jackson, Murphy, and the rest. They were good men. They died doing their duty. And you did yours too, Sarah said firmly. Just differently. That night, for the first time since he'd been home, Dad didn't pace the living room. Instead, he sat with us and watched TV. Really watched, laughing at the jokes, commenting on the stories. When it was time for bed, Tommy hugged Dad extra tight. I'm proud of you, Daddy, he whispered. You saved kids like me. Dad closed his eyes, holding his youngest son close. Thank you, Tommy, he whispered back. I needed to hear that. The truth had been set free, but the healing was just beginning. At the end of the letter, one line stood apart. 6 months later, Dad was different. Not completely healed. We'd learned that some wounds never fully close but different in the ways that mattered. He started sleeping through the night. He joined conversations at dinner instead of just listening. He even began telling us stories about the good parts of the war, the friendships, the small acts of kindness, the letters from home that kept spirits alive. But the real change came with a knock on our door on a Tuesday evening in March. Dad answered it to find a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and kind eyes. She was holding the hand of a little boy who looked about Tommy's age. Are you Frank Morrison? She asked in accented English. Dad's face went white. Yes. My name is Li Wei. I believe you knew my family during the war. The silence stretched between them like a bridge across time and oceans. Hill 1081, Dad said quietly. She nodded. You saved our lives. Dad invited them in, his hands shaking as he served tea. Li Wei told us her story, how her family had been hiding in the caves when the American soldiers arrived, how her grandmother had been sure they were all going to die. And then this soldier you opened the back entrance and told us to run, she said, looking directly at Dad. You spoke to my grandmother in broken Chinese. You said, go. Take children. Go now. Tommy was fascinated. You were the little girl in the letter? Li Wei smiled. I was 6 years old. I remember your father's face. He was crying. Dad wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry for what my decision cost. Cost? Li Wei looked confused. Mr. Morrison, you give us our lives. My grandmother lived to be 91. My parents had 3 more children after the war. I became a doctor. My son, she gestured to the quiet boy beside her, will grow up free because of your choice. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. My grandmother saved money her entire life to find you. She died last year, but she made me promise to deliver this. Dad opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph of Li Wei's family at her medical school graduation and a letter written in English with careful, deliberate handwriting. Dear American soldier, my name is Chin Mei Lin. You saved my family on November 15, 1951. I do not know your name, but I have prayed for you every day for 30 years. I want you to know what happened after you let us escape. My daughter Li Min became a teacher. She taught over 2,000 children to read. My son Li Gang became an engineer. He built bridges that connect villages to medical care. My granddaughter Li Wei became a doctor. She has delivered 847 babies and saved countless lives. You saved 6 people that day. But look what those 6 people became. Look how many lives they touched. The soldiers who died in that battle, they died protecting innocent people. They died so that children could grow up and make the world better. That is not failure. That is the highest honor. You did not cause their deaths. War caused their deaths. You chose mercy in a moment when mercy was dangerous. That choice saved not just us, but everyone we went on to help. I am old now. I will not live much longer. But I needed you to know the little girl you saved became a woman who saves others. The family you protected became a family that serves the world. This is your true legacy. Not the 8 who died, but the thousands who lived because of your choice. Thank you, American soldier. Thank you for showing us that even in war, there is room for compassion. With eternal gratitude, Chin Mei Lin. P.S. If you have children, tell them their father is a hero. Not because he fought, but because he chose love over fear. Dad read the letter 3 times before he could speak. When he finally looked up, we were all crying. 847 babies, Li Wei said softly. I named the first one Frank, after you. That evening, after Li Wei and her son left, Dad sat down and wrote letters. 8 letters. To the families of the men who died at Hill 1081. He told them about Li Wei. About the 2,000 children taught to read, the bridges built, the lives saved. He told them that their husbands and sons and brothers hadn't died for nothing. They died protecting the kind of choice that makes heroes. Their sacrifice made my mercy possible, he told us as he sealed the envelopes. They died so that little girl could live. We're all part of the same story. 3 weeks later, we started getting letters back. Henderson's widow from Tulsa wrote that knowing about Li Wei's family brought her the first peace she'd felt in years. Jackson's mother sent a photo of her grandchildren, kids who existed because their grandfather had fought for a world where mercy was possible. Dad framed Chin Mei Lin's letter and hung it in his study, right next to his military commendations. But more importantly, he started sharing his story. He spoke at schools about the complexity of war and the importance of difficult choices. He volunteered at the VA hospital, helping other veterans process their own guilt and grief. He became the father we'd always needed, present, whole, and unafraid to talk about hard things. Tommy, now a teenager, wrote a school report titled My Hero Father. Not because Dad had killed enemies, but because he'd chosen to save strangers. The last line of his report read, My dad taught me that sometimes being a hero means being willing to carry the weight of an impossible choice. And sometimes it means choosing love even when love costs everything. 6 months after Li Wei's visit, Dad received one final letter. It was from Frank Chin, Li Wei's first baby, now a young man studying medicine in America. Dear Mr. Morrison, Drive. Li told me I was named after you. I wanted you to know that I'm applying to join Doctors Without Borders. I want to help children in war zones, just like you helped my grandmother's family. Thank you for the name. Thank you for the life. Thank you for showing the world that one act of mercy can echo through generations. Your legacy lives on. Frank Chen. That night, Dad slept peacefully for the first time since the war ended. And we finally understood that the letter wasn't just his confession, it had become our inheritance. Not the guilt and the pain, but the courage to choose compassion even when it's costly. The war had taken 8 men from this world, but one moment of mercy had given the world thousands more. In the end, love had multiplied far beyond what fear had destroyed.